was full of compassion and care and real interest in us. And I thought, that's why you've got that name. Well, there might be other reasons. Anyway, I hope that's going to just flow out of you again today. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the afternoon, and I'll probably just repeat again something at the end about what's coming up next. But for now, I'm just going to hand over to Dharma Krunya.
Yes. Ooh. Ooh. Can everybody hear me? Good. I do have a quiet voice, so if at some point I inadvertently move back from the microphone and my voice drops, would people sort of wave at me and I'll up my voice, okay? So let's salute the shrine together. Well, I'm really pleased, privileged to be able to talk to you this afternoon about Amitabha. If you saw an earlier version of the program, you'll wonder why I'm not Amalacitta. And unfortunately, we were due to sort of do this together, and unfortunately, her health has meant she's had an accident recently, and it's meant that she's not been able to do this. So you've got me instead, I'm afraid. So it's a real privilege actually to be able to talk about Amitabha. When I was ordained in 2014, I was given Amitabha as my yidam, as for my sadhana practice. And it's a figure that I've had a very long connection with, almost in a sense, since I met the Dharma. So it's a long story, and I won't be sort of telling all of that story this afternoon by any stretch. But I think that Amitabha is very much a figure that is at the heart of the MBC, not least because we have two rupas on the shrines here. We have this really lovely one, which I'll say something about in a bit, and we have another Amitabha rupa in the Vajra hall. So in a sense, it's probably, if it's a figure that people are familiar with, I think from a very early stage when they start coming to MBC. So I'm going to start this afternoon by talking a little bit about Amitabha and his qualities, and then move on to talk about different manifestations of Amitabha. So I'll probably talk, I haven't timed it strictly, but I'm quite good on timing, so don't worry, I won't sort of occupy the entire 2 hours with the talk. So I'm going to talk probably for about half an hour about Amitabha, and then we'll have a chance to go into groups for a short while, and then we're going to come back and do a particular meditation practice which is linked to his qualities. Okay. So Amitabha is one of the 5 jinnas, one of the 5 mythical Buddhas who represent aspects of the Buddha's enlightenment. And if we look at the figure of the Refuge Tree, he's one of the, or he, she, they, are one of the figures right at the top. The red figure, 2 in from the left. And Jinna, the term Jinna, J-I-N-A, means conqueror. And it was a term that was given to the Buddha because of his victory over the root poisons, the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. So Amitabha is a Sanskrit term, and it means limitless light. Okay, so I've brought a couple of other images which I've put on the shrine this afternoon, which are from Pure Land Buddhism. And one of them in particular, Surika was just saying, it's slightly sort of hallucinogenic as an image. Yes, so it's this kind of evocation of the limitless light of Amitabha. So he means limitless light, and the figure also has another related manifestation called Amitayus, or limitless life. So light and life, okay? And Amitayus is more usually depicted with a sort of a bowl of nectar in their hands. Now, in Japanese Pure Land Buddhism, Amitabha is known as Amida, which means without measure. And so the couple of smaller images on the shrine are both from Pure Land Buddhism, so they're both, in effect, images of Amida. Okay, and I'll say a little bit about one of those images in a bit. So in Sangharakshita, the founder of our movement and our order, in his 1991 seminar on the figure, it suggested that Amitabha represents the Dharmakaya, or ultimate reality, and Amitayus, the Sambhogakaya, or mythical reality. A mythical reality which is more connected to the life of the world, and ultimate reality which, of course, is connected with our highest spiritual aspirations. So the mythical history of Amitabha is found in several Mahayana sutras, which are a feature of Pure Land Buddhism, the Pure Land Sutras. And Pure Land Buddhism, as some of you may know, is a type of Buddhism that's widely practiced in East Asia, in China and Japan. And the sort of legend goes, this is the story slot, by the way, the legend goes that a young man named Dharmakara vowed to gain enlightenment in the presence of a Buddha called Lokeshvara Raja, and made 48 great vows to save living beings. Now, this included a primal vow, a very, very, very important vow, that their enlightenment was conditional on them creating a pure land or a sukhavati, a pure land or a sukhavati, a land of bliss, okay, an ideal place to practice the Dharma, where Amitabha's or Amida's followers would be reborn. And in these Pure Land Sutras, there are beautiful descriptions of the Pure Land. They're really, really beautiful. As also quite a few of you know, Ratnaguna, who's a senior order member in our Sangha, wrote a book some years ago, which was partly translations of the sutras and also a commentary on the sutras. And it's a lovely book to dip into, not least for all the kind of mythology around the figure of Amida, but also for these beautiful evocations of the Pure Land, where there are jewels everywhere and streams whispering the Dharma and birds singing the Dharma. And it's a really magical, magical realm. So Amitabha is the mythical Buddha of the Western realm. He's very much associated with the West. And so he is also this central figure of Pure Land Buddhism in the Amida form. And going for refuge in Pure Land Buddhism relies on something called other power. And we were talking a little bit about this last weekend on the weekend for women. So it relies very much more on an other power practice rather than a self-power practice. And it it entails in Pure Land Buddhism calling on Amitabha, or Amida I should say, in a way that I think is in some ways quite reminiscent of Christianity. And it's often said that Pure Land Buddhism is the closest Buddhism comes to Christianity in some way, because it has this central figure of Amida at the heart. So in Pure Land Buddhism, Amitabha's name is repeated, and that's known as reciting the Nembutsu, and being caught by the light ray hook of Amitabha's or Amida's compassion. Moving between the two traditions here, yes? So being caught by the light ray hook of Amida's compassion. And it's a great compassion. It's a Maha Karuna, okay? So it's a very all-encompassing compassion that Amida or Amitabha represents. It also involves a great receptivity and a letting go of ourselves into faith, Shraddha, which often in Pure Land Buddhism isn't actually translated so much as faith, but really as a kind of true entrusting, that we really rely on the Buddha, the mythical Buddhas in our practice, that they are there for us. They're never, burnt out, checked out, on holiday. They're always there. So we're invoking, in Pure Land Buddhism, we're invoking Amida in that way. And in so doing, we then, letting go into true entrusting, we become a channel for Amida. Okay, we become a channel for this higher spiritual power that is working through us in the Pure Land tradition. And then we're reborn in the Pure Land, and this corresponds to our deepest longing and to our intuitive sense of what going for refuge might mean. Okay, and obviously going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, whether you're a Buddhist in Manchester, Japan, or California, is what we all have in common, isn't it? Yeah? So Amitabha, going back to the Indo-Tibetan tradition now, Amitabha is a very attractive figure, at least to me anyway, but he's, or he or she, is an attractive figure, and sometimes depicted as golden in the Mahayana Sutras. In the Indo-Tibetan tradition, more often depicted as red, a very warm, passionate red colour. We have the golden version on our shrine, and of course we have the lovely backdrop. I was so pleased when we had a bit of a redecoration recently and we went red. So we have the red and the gold of the figures that Amitabha is associated with. And he's associated with the end of the day, or dusk, okay, that sort of liminal, very sensitive period at the end of the day. It's about 5 o'clock at the moment, isn't it? So we're not quite at Amitabha's time of day yet, but it's that very delicate end of the day where the light is fading. And Amitabha is associated with the end of the day because there's a sense in which the light is withdrawing from worldly concerns. Okay, remember limitless light. So withdrawing from worldly concerns into more spiritual concerns. Okay, so that's the reason why he's associated with that time of day. Amitabha's element, unsurprisingly, is fire. Okay, a very alchemical, very elemental force. And they're associated with the lotus family in Buddhism. So the lotus, we have Amitabha, he is sitting on a lotus. In fact, we have him sitting on a double lotus, yes? So very much associated with the lotus. And it's often sort of said, isn't it, that in our spiritual practice, the metaphor of the lotus is often used, isn't it? In particular, about the sort of gentle and delicate unfolding of our spiritual practice, that it can't be summoned or ordered. It's a very subtle process, and it happens over a very long period of time, yeah? So it's a very delicate thing which opens, a bit like you can't force a flower to bloom, can you? We're a bit desperate for flowers to bloom at the moment because we've had quite a rainy, cold winter in Manchester, but we can't force a flower to bloom. We just have to let it unfold in its time, in the conditions it's in, yeah? And this is very much, that delicate energy is very much part of Amitabha's world. So qualities of great compassion, a gentleness, an openness, and a receptivity. So these energies are very slow and contemplative. So there's a sense that the ripening will happen in its own time. And in a sense, it really has to happen that way. It can't happen any other way. So each of the mythical Buddhas, the 5 jhanas, are associated with a particular type of wisdom. So we've seen that Amitabha is associated with compassion. And the wisdom, Amitabha's wisdom, is a discriminating wisdom. So discriminating wisdom is, it's a very, again, a very delicate, a very fine wisdom that sees into the heart of things. It sees into the minutiae of each tiny thing in the world. Well, maybe the big things as well, but it sees the kind of gentle energies and the particular qualities of each and everything in the world. Okay, so it's almost like a sort of a very fine attention, yeah, to the qualities of each individual thing. Yeah. And often that wisdom of Amitabha is associated with the attention of a lover. Okay? So if you've ever been in love, I'm sure lots of people have in the room, or maybe you are, you notice things about your beloved, don't you? You really notice the detail. Maybe the irritating details that they don't put the cap on the toothpaste, but also the kind of nice ones that they have really nice ears or whatever else you might quite like about them. So it's that kind of fine-tuning, that fine attention that Amitabha brings to us, yes, when we are in Amitabha's gaze, but also to everything in the world. But of course, because Amitabha is a mythical Buddha, okay, his wisdom is non-dual, and his compassion and all his qualities are unconditional. So that's, possibly a bit not like romantic love sometimes, but I guess it depends really. But yes, so it's very much an unconditional love, an unconditional, non-discriminatory kind of passion, which also sees the absolute detail. So in the Wheel of Life, we'll have just walked along the corridor, went we, into the Lotus Hall a few minutes ago, and we passed, I'm hoping it's still there, but usually on the wall there is a depiction of the Wheel of Life. And in the Wheel of Life, Amitabha is presented in the realm of the hungry ghosts. And that's because in each of the realms on the Wheel of Life, we have a Buddha. And Amitabha is in the realm of the hungry ghosts because they bring what those hungry ghosts need. So the hungry ghost is a sort of metaphor really for a sort of poverty mentality. It's a kind of endless greed that can't be satisfied, really. And of course, what can satisfy that greed is spiritual practice, yes, and the unconditional compassion and qualities of Amitabha. So he's very skilled at transforming that conditional passion and obsession and addiction and all of those kind of ways we have of trying to grasp the world into spiritual qualities, into sort of skillful, passionate energies, really, rather than passionate attachment, okay? So he transforms that sort of poverty mentality into a much deeper contentment, okay? So Amitabha works with our deepest and our ugliest cravings, okay? And supports us in that process, changing them into beautiful qualities like faith and receptivity and loving compassion and wisdom. And Amitabha is also associated with an appreciation of beauty. Possibly that's why those descriptions of the Pure Land in the sutras are just so amazing. They're not to everybody's taste. They are a tad blingy, but they're sort of magnificent. They're opulent, really, and yes, they're sort of very, sort of unconditional. Let's really go for it, kind of beauty. So and just a few more things. He's often depicted as the meditating Buddha. Okay, so in the Vajra hall, we have another Rupa of Amitabha, and we have him with the dhyana mudra, the gesture of meditation like this, okay? And I think often, in a garden centre near you, you will have seen depictions of Amitabha, because it's often the sort of, how can I put this, the image that people associate with Buddhism, really, the meditating, calm sort of Buddha. So Amitabha certainly gets around, including into your local garden centre. I want to say a little bit about different representations of Amitabha. So we have obviously this huge figure on the shrine, which is of Amitabha holding a lotus. And this is based on a vision that Sangharakshita had of Amitabha. So I'm just going to read that. Some of you will know this text very well, and some of you may not know it at all, and that's fine. So it's called The Vision in the Cave. One night, I found myself, as it were, out of the body and in the presence of Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light, who presides over the western quarter of the universe. The color of the Buddha was a deep, rich, luminous red, like that of rubies, though at the same time soft and glowing, like the light of the setting sun. While his left hand rested on his lap, the fingers of his right hand held up by the stalk a single red lotus in full bloom, and he sat in the usual cross-legged posture on an enormous red lotus that floated on the surface of the sea. To the left, immediately beneath the raised right arm of the Buddha, was the red hemisphere of the setting sun, its reflection glittering golden across the waters. How long the experience lasted, I do not know, for I seemed to be out of time as well as out of the body. but I saw the Buddha as clearly as I had ever seen anything under the ordinary circumstances of my life, indeed far more clearly and vividly. The rich red colour of Amitabha himself, as well as of the two lotuses and the setting sun, made a particularly deep impression on me. It was more wonderful, more appealing than any earthly red. It was like red light, but so soft and at the same time so vivid as to be altogether without parallel. In the course of the next few days, I composed a series of stanzas describing the vision. Contrary to my usual practice, I failed to write them down afterwards, with the result that they gradually faded from my mind. But the experience itself has never faded. Nearly a quarter of a century later, the figure of the red Buddha is as clear to me in recollection as it was the next morning in the Virupaksha Guhya. So the nature of visions, I think, is that we can't really say much about them. You know, we accept them rather than attempt to try to bring them into the sphere of rational explanation. I think it's interesting nonetheless that there's an evocation here. There's the Buddha holding up a lotus, and there may be a reference here to the flower sermon, the Buddha's flower sermon, in which he held up a lotus silently, and only one of his disciples, Mahakashyapa, understood the wordless transmission of his teaching about wisdom and impermanence. So I think this image, I don't know, I wasn't here back in the 1990s when the Rupa was chosen, but whenever I walk into this space, it has a very powerful effect on me. And of course, all of us, however long we've been coming to the Buddhist Center, have a relationship with these Rupas. Secondly, an image that's spoken to me in my practice is the image of Amitabha or Amida looking back. So I don't know, it's not a big image on the shrine, and do feel free to come and have a look at it later, but it's the image over there on the left. It's based on a very famous Rupa in Japanese Buddhism, which is in a temple in Kyoto, in the Aikando, my Japanese is not great, maybe it's Aikando, temple in Kyoto. And I've been there twice and seen it, and it's a very, very beautiful Rupa. It's actually only about this tall, okay? But it's quite a complicated path to get to see it. So in a sense, it's a bit of a mini pilgrimage to go and see it. But it's very, very beautiful. And there's a story around this particular Rupa where I'll give you the shorter version of it, really. But essentially, again, it's an extraordinary experience in which there was a priest in the temple it was in Nara, which is a small town, one of the old capitals of Japan, which is south of Kyoto. And he was a priest, and he was very moved by the plight of the poor and the weak and the needy, and wanted to practice as much as he could for those people in society. And he began to, as a way of developing his compassionate practice, he began to worship the figure of Amida, associated with great compassion, Maha Karuna. And there's quite a long story to this, but I'll cut to the chase. And after many years of practicing in this way and tending to this Rupa, which it wasn't a rupa that at that time was accessible to ordinary people, as it were. It was kept in the temple, and only very few people could see it. And he used to be very frustrated about this, and he thought, well, it's such a powerful rupa, I would like everybody to see it. But the emperor, told him to accept that it needed to stay where it was. Anyway, he was going about his monastic duties one morning, and he was walking past the rupa, and suddenly he heard a voice. And it said, "Akan, follow me." And what he saw was the rupa getting down off its pedestal and turning towards, in effect, turning towards the world. And obviously that was a very powerful image. And he was so affected by this experience, vision, whatever you might want to call it, that he prayed that the figure would remain in that compassionate pose of turning towards the world's suffering forever. Okay, so that is the figure on the left of Amida turning towards the world. There's also a sort of sense that he's turning towards the world with a view to bringing beings into the Pure Land. Yeah, in effect, follow me, as he said to Akan. And what's attracted me to this particular image, apart from the fact that I love a nice rupa, is that it's a very active expression of compassion, isn't it? A very active expression of compassion for the world. It's turning towards the world. And I think one of the things that's run through my practice is that from a very early Dharma age, if I can put it in those terms, it's very important to me that my Buddhist practice was centered on the world. Yes, that it needed to have, I hope it does have a positive effect on the things that I do in the world and the people that I come into contact with, but it was very important to me that it was a real world practice, that it wasn't some sort of, it wasn't a withdrawal for me, it was a coming in more closely to the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why, the rupa has been quite an important thing for me. And I think it also acts as a bit of an invocation as well for us to keep practicing, to keep turning towards. And I think it's really hard. I think it's really, really hard to keep turning towards the world. There is such a lot of things, such a lot of suffering in the world, such a lot happening in the world. And it seems to me that Amitabha supports us to turn towards the world, not with horrified anxiety or with shock or despair or with aversion, but turning towards the world. And in our necessarily small way, we're finite beings, aren't we? With limited capacities and lifespans and so forth, in our limited way, that we turn towards the world and bring what we can, really. So I'm going to stop there. Now we have an opportunity to go into groups, I think, for about half an hour. And what I'm going to suggest is that you might, anything that's come out of the talk that you find interesting for your discussions. But if you want a bit more of a steer than that, sometimes people like a bit of a steer, reflecting on Karuna, really, and the nature of compassion, and maybe Amitabha's other qualities, and to what extent you connect with those, and in what ways you might wish to develop them more in your practice. Okay, so we'll have, say, about half an hour in groups, and then we'll come back, and then for the last section of this afternoon, we're going to do a meditation practice called the Karuna Bhavana, okay? So that's what will happen afterwards, okay? So could have gone the puja route, but I decided to go the meditation route this afternoon. So, okay, thank you. Oh, maybe 5 or so, 5 or 6. Just so within half an hour, I think 5 or 6 for half an hour is probably, it means people get a chance to each say what their response might be. And yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah. a helpful sort of opportunity to reflect a little bit on some of the things around compassion and Amitabha and his qualities. Moving into this next part, I wanted us to practice a Karuna Bhavana together, which I'll explain in a minute, because I imagine for a lot of people in the room it's not very familiar, so I'll explain it. But I thought it might be helpful to just talk a little bit about compassion. It's what we've been talking about in the last sort of half an hour or so. So compassion, Karuna, is, as probably many of you know, is one of the Brahma Viharas, isn't it? And compassion, I think to have a strong practice of compassion, we need to wind back a little bit and have a strong practice of metta. So many of you will be familiar with the Metta Bhavana practice. Is there anybody who isn't familiar with the Metta Bhavana practice? Okay. Well, I'll explain things as we go, and hopefully, if you have any questions afterwards, we can have a chat about that. Okay. So I think to have a strong practice of compassion or karuna, we need to have a strong practice of metta, because it seems to me that karuna is what happens when our metta practice meets suffering. So in the Metta Bhavana, we're cultivating metta or loving kindness to different categories, aren't we? First of all, to ourselves. We're wanting to be cultivating a mettaful response, a kindly response to ourselves. It's often the stage in Metta Bhavana, I include myself here, that most people, that people can find quite tricky. I think it's partly a sort of cultural thing, and partly just it can feel a little bit unfamiliar, really, sometimes. So we cultivate metta towards ourselves, and then to a good friend, then to a neutral person, and that's most people that we'll never meet, because most people will be the neutral person for us. And then the person whom we have difficulties with, and then lastly, we extend our metta to all beings, and that's hopefully a very familiar practice for most of us. And then with the Karuna Bhavana, we need to start with this. It's often the Brahma Viharas are often described as a tree, and metta is often described as the root of the tree. And of course, without the root of the tree, the branches, fall down. They don't function. So we need this kind of strong trunk. I'm running with the tree metaphor now. We need this strong trunk of metta, really, to cultivate many of these other qualities in the Brahma Viharas, but also, I think, more generally in the spiritual life. So this is really, really important to cultivate metta. And I think in my experience, when I've not got a strong metta flow or a strong metta current going in my being, I'm somebody who is very affected by my environment, and I can feel very affected by other people and all sorts of circumstances in the world, as I'm sure many of you are as well. So I'm somebody who has to ration my exposure to the news and all those kinds of things, because there's a huge amount of, stating the very obvious, there's a huge amount of suffering about, isn't there? Even if we never turned on any media, we'd be familiar, I think, with all sorts of suffering in our immediate environment, wouldn't we? Both our own and then our friends and partners and whoever else is in our immediate environment. So firstly, just to say, we need this strong metta practice to develop karuna, because I think otherwise what can happen is we tip in various other directions. And I think one would be horrified anxiety. So this kind of shock response to the suffering in the world, and a sort of horror at it, and also an anxiety about it, because one one just doesn't feel that the world is a very safe place sometimes. So we can tip into this horrified anxiety. Or another thing that I find myself doing sometimes is making a judgment about suffering, about people causing their own suffering. I'm very good at causing my own suffering as well. I'm quite a past mistress at it. But yes, that I notice in myself that I can, slide into judgments about suffering. If they only didn't do that, they'd kind of, relieve their own suffering in a trice. So I think judgment is another thing that can happen as well. And I think also it can be quite difficult. I think there's a sort of gravitational pull around suffering sometimes, which I certainly feel, and it can be quite difficult to have a sort of an appropriate sort of, I don't know, distance isn't quite the right word I'm getting at, but it can be quite difficult not to be sucked in by it, I think, sometimes. And I think that it's often said in spiritual practice, as we develop our practice, we become more and more sensitive. And I think that sometimes means that we end up taking more in, and it can be quite hard sometimes to find a way of working with that suffering. So I think, yes, cultivating metta, cultivating this positive mental state of metta is really, really important. And so a little bit about the practice that we're going to do. So if you do know the Metta Bhavana, it will be sort of broadly familiar to you, although it has an extra stage, okay? So the practice is actually a 6-stage practice, okay? And I've got them written down because I always slightly forget the extra stage here, or I miss one of the later ones out, so write it down. So the stages are compassion towards myself, so empathizing with ourselves and generating metta towards ourselves and holding ourselves in kindly regard or kindly self-regard. So that'll be the first stage. The stages won't be very lengthy, by the way. And then the second stage is we bring to mind a suffering person. Now, I need to say a little bit about this. We often say when we're teaching the Metta Bhavana, when you're thinking about somebody who I have difficulty with, it's not maybe the best idea to choose somebody that you've got an all-out war with, or a very conflicted, long-term, conflictual situation. So choose a fairly, I would suggest a fairly smallish example of suffering, really, and bringing that person to mind, really. And then, yes, offering them, turning towards them and offering them compassion and holding them in that kindly, metaful gaze. And we have then this sort of alchemy. So in a way, it's the Metta Bhavana, and then it meets the suffering in the different stages. And we have this alchemy of the metta hopefully flowing out and meeting these different situations of suffering. And then, the suffering person, it can be, somebody who you know a little bit. It might just be somebody that you've, met today. It doesn't, just somebody who, it doesn't need to be a close friend or anything, just somebody who you can bring to mind, who you observe, you observe their suffering. Third stage is the friend. So we bring to mind a good friend, and we express karuna, we cultivate karuna towards them. The fourth stage is very much like the Metta Bhavana now, the neutral person, okay? There's lots of opportunities. I was slightly eavesdropping, I'm afraid, on the conversations while I was here, and there's lots of opportunities coming into town this afternoon to see suffering in a big city, isn't there? Yes, so the neutral person. Yeah, so bringing to mind a neutral person, and then a person with whom we have difficulties, and extending metta and karuna towards them, and then the final stage, all of the people in the practice. Okay. So if you'd like to find a comfortable spot that you're willing to sit in, either on a chair or on a cushion, for the next period. So we'll do the Karuna Bhavana. Each stage will probably be about 5 minutes, and then we'll end with the Amitabha mantra, which I will start off, and I'll cross my fingers and hope that people will join in afterwards. Okay. So let's just have a few minutes of settling down, finding the contact with the floor. Whether you're sitting on a chair and your feet against the cushion on the floor, or whether you're sitting on a stool or cushions, and your knees and lower legs are contacting the cushions and floor, and allowing the floor and the earth below to support us. Taking just a few minutes to tune in to how we are as embodied beings. Noticing how our energy is. So we move into the later stages of the afternoon. We've been talking and listening, reflecting. So just tuning into the felt sense of our bodies. Our embodied being. Noticing if we have a sense of energy and vitality, or maybe the qualities of our energy are quieter, more contemplative, becoming stiller. tuning into the felt sense of the heart area. Turning towards our heart. And our innate capacity for loving kindness. Karana Bhavana, first stage, turning towards ourself with metta and with compassion. Allowing the gentle waves of Amitabha's compassion to support us. And turning towards ourselves. The warm glow of compassion, allowing ourselves to relax under its light. Gentle light of Karuna flowing through our being. Limitless light, and limitless love. And turning towards somebody who is currently suffering. Allowing the light of Amitabha's great compassion to shine upon them. We're not trying to fix anything. We're simply generating metta towards this person. And wishing them well. There may be little we can practically do, but we can wish them supportive conditions and send them metta towards their situation. May they experience the compassionate light of Amitabha. Turn towards a good friend. and allow the light to flow forth. To support them in whatever conditions they're in. In whatever way they might be suffering, we send them loving kindness. Staying in touch with ourselves and the suffering person, keeping that thread of metta as we wish our friend well. Keeping faith with our heart. Allowing that friend to be bathed in the light rays of Amitabha, the light rays of compassion. Limitless. That gentle energy, loving energy continues to flow. Now we turn towards a neutral person. Perhaps somebody across the shrine room who we don't know. Or or somebody we've passed in the street this afternoon, somebody with whom we have no history. Most of the people in the world will be neutral people for us. And turning that kindly gaze towards them. Channeling our metta, our loving kindness towards that person. Our heart is big enough to respond. Wishing them well, whatever the circumstances of their life. Circumstances we can't possibly know. And then we turn to somebody in our lives with whom we have a difficulty. Perhaps not a major difficulty. Noticing if we have a heart response to them. Perhaps we don't. Or perhaps we can notice that flow of metta in the earlier stages of the practice. And allow it to flow on. knowing that regardless of our difficulty, that person, like us, wants to live their life with some degree of contentment and ease. And perhaps they've been subject to all sorts of conditions that we know nothing about. Perhaps we can open to Amitabha's compassion and love and allow this limitless love and light to embrace this person too. Maybe letting go any judgments that we have, at least for now. That they too have the chance to be bathed in this golden light. Knowing that this difficulty we have is impermanent like everything else, so it will fade. That this person is another person in our lives. Today, perhaps difficult. Next week, perhaps not. And extending the practice now, so including ourselves, a person who is suffering, good friend, the neutral person, the person with whom we have a difficulty, and allowing that golden light of Amitabha, of great compassion, to light up all of these lives and extend out into the world. this limitless light and limitless compassion. So out into the city of Manchester. And all the many, many conditions that people are experiencing. And beyond Manchester. Out into the world, further and further. The light is limitless. And the heart is limitless. So we'll finish with the Amitabha mantra. Om Amitabha Hri, 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 Om Amitabha
just feel like speaking quietly after that meditation. But it's just really nice, I think, for us to just thank Dharma Karunya for a lovely afternoon evoking the qualities of Amitabha and also sharing sort of the history and the stories of Amitabha with us, and that lovely meditation and a lovely chance for us to connect with each other and just talk about our practice and compassion in our lives and how all that is. So yeah, just let's give her a round of applause and thank her for the afternoon. And just a reminder that next Saturday is the last in this series of Teachers of Enlightenment. It's yourself, isn't it, Aparajita, next week? Do you want to say what you're doing, the theme? Come on, come and tell us. It's the great finale. The culmination. We've had the lovey-dovey stuff this week. The wisdom of the blue sky. How appealing is that to come and explore next week with yourself and Leela Shuri, is it? Yeah, that's great. So do come along, and also just a reminder that tomorrow is what's called Parinirvana Day. We're marking the point in time when the historical Buddha died, and we sort of, it's a time of reflection. We're going to be hearing a talk from Varasaki, and we'll also have a chance just to reflect and bring to mind people that we have known ourselves who've died in the last couple of years. So it's a lovely, it's a very beautiful festival in a way. It's sort of celebrated, but it's sort of somber and reflective and very meaningful, really. So anybody who wants to come along, there's shared lunch 1 till 2, and then the afternoon's led by Moksha Jyoti and Varasaki. You may or may not know them, but you're really, really welcome to come along, and of course next Saturday. So we'll leave it there, but good to see you all. Okay, bye, and bye everybody who's joined us online.